This conference will now be recorded.
So welcome everyone to another OCP session. Today we have Dr. Oliver Rawashdeh from University of Queensland in Australia. So it's like 7 a.m. for him. So that's why we had to push the call basically in 3 hours. So as usual, I will go with introducing Dr. Rawashdeh, and hopefully meanwhile we'll solve this technical issue so we can basically share the slides. So Dr. Rawashdeh is a senior lecturer, associate professor in neuroscience and research group leader at the School of Biomedical Science in the Faculty of Medicine, University of Queensland. He leads an established research program in chronobiology and sleep after moving his lab from the Goethe University of Frankfurt in Germany. So Dr. Rawashdeh has more than 18 years of research experience in the field of chronobiology and neuroscience. Dr. Rawashdeh's research is integrative in neuroscience and chronobiology, the study of biological clocks. In the laboratory of Professor Arnold Eskin, Dr. Rawashdeh is investigating how processes and complex as learning and memory are modulated by biological clocks. He later joined the laboratory of Professor Gregg Cahill and Professor Greg Roman, expert in chronobiology and behavioral neuroscience, respectively, where he investigated the role of melatonin, a nighttime restrictive hormone signal, in long-term memory consolidation. Dr. Rawashdeh's findings are very well cited and published in prestigious journals such as like Science, PNAS, and Journal of Neuroscience. Dr. Rawashdeh is also an expert in chronopharmacology, trained, so many terms for me, new terms, trained by world-renowned melatonin researcher and pharmacologist, distinguished professor Dr. Margarita Dubocovich. In his postdoctoral work, elucidated by the role of melatonin in circadian physiology and pharmacology during development and aging, Dr. Rawashdeh is an expert in animal behaviors and circadian systems across different research models. We skip those crazy terms. He received his training in human neuroanatomy from the Senckenbergische Anatomy and Department of Neurology at the Goethe University in Frankfurt. Dr. Rawashdeh is the recipient of numerous awards, including Trainee Fellowship from Federation of American Society for Experimental Biology in 2011, and in 2013, a Trainee Fellowship from the Gordon Research Foundation in US in 2012. To present his research, Dr. Rawashdeh was awarded in 2013 with a US patent for his work on methods for improving memory in mammals, including human, and is heavily involved in scientific outreach and engaging the public science by sharing his knowledge with primary and secondary high school students and giving interviews using various local and international media outlets. Since 2015, Dr. Rawashdeh has been serving as an executive member of the Australasian Chronobiology Society. So just as a background, my wife studies MD, and she was taking one of the courses from Dr. Rawashdeh, and I overheard clocks, synchronization, and all these, crazy terms. And then, I was just I thought first like it's a prank, like she's basically watching some of my videos trying to, tease me. And then I come and see, no, actually, she was studying something similar to what I deal with on a daily basis, but in her field. So then long story short, I got super excited about like what she was like, listening to, and then I contacted Dr. Rawashdeh, and he was very nice to share with me a lot of interesting things like in his research. And I thought like, wow, like there's so many things in common. And so I invited him to give a speech in our forum, because I thought like there there might be like a lot of the, let's say, interesting, similarities, or let's say, you never know, like biological inspired things and so on. So with no further ado, we'll give the floor to Dr. Oliver Rawashdeh.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, and Miss for this beautiful introduction. I don't know, but my lecture slide made it onto the screen. How that happened, but it just happened. So yeah,
Magic.
fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Much appreciated. All right. So there will be a little bit of engineering in my talk today. I think two words, but you know. If you don't get anything out of it today, probably something that will help you a bit more understand it in your body and why you're going through the things that you do as you trouble. So at least you'll get something out of it today.
Yes.
So very much, so I appreciate, I'm very excited to be in here. And I hope I can keep this as lay language as it possible and easy to understand. Fantastic. So we'll start. Slide number 2. Okay, so these are basically the topics I covered today. What are biological rhythms, the purpose of the clock, the biology of the clock, and clock disruption. We are living in a rhythmic environment. Undeniable, has always been rhythmic. Everything around it is rhythmic. Life evolved under these conditions, and therefore it is just it's reasonable to think that time, information about time and rhythms are deeply rooted into life and into individual cells. One interesting theory is, for example, that early Earth, there was very little, if not an atmosphere, and the atmosphere is very important for screening it and radiation and protecting it and life on Earth from these radiation. So those organisms or early life that had an advantage of being able to foretell time could predict when the sun would rise, and therefore had an advantage to get away from exposed sites that were exposed, to protect themselves and were for life to continue. And that's an early view about just to bring this a little bit closer to your understanding about or the importance of time in life and how ancient clocks are, and really clocks, biological clocks are the primary purpose is to predict events from happening before they occur. Next. So when we talk about it in rhythms, you are familiar with the seasons. So in this case, we refer to the circadian rhythms, and they are they resulted or they are the resultant of the Earth's rotation around the sun. So these are the 4 seasons, and of course, depending on where you're located or housed on the Earth, that differs whether you have 4 or you have 2. The changes or the Earth's rotation about its axis that generates circadian rhythms, or these are rhythms that have a period of approximately 24 hours, and then there are also ultradian rhythms, which are rhythms that are much higher in frequency. In other words, they have a shorter period, so less than 24 hours. So circannual is about yearly cycles, circadian is rhythms with a period of approximately 24 hours, and ultradian is rhythms that are significantly shorter than 24 hours. So let's start with circannual rhythms. Circannual rhythms are influenced by the temperature fluctuation. Makes sense, because if you take the 4 seasons, the temperature fluctuates, peaking in the summer and lowers in the winter. And there are certain cells called calendar cells that pick up on these changes in date and length as you go through the year, or changes in the temperature maximum or minimum throughout the year, food availability as well, and so forth. So these are calendar cells, and they are found within your brain. And these cells not only pick up on such information that varies across the year, but they're also coupled to downstream physiological functions, such as triggering hibernation, waking up from hibernation, so entering, maintaining, and then waking up again. They are regulating the reproduction, also the migration. If you know the birds start to migrate from one part of the earth to another, depending on the season. And here, for example, is such a calendar cell in B, but in A, let's go through this first. So there's generally there is an oscillator in the brain. We just call it an oscillator for now, that picks up on variation in date and length, for an example, via the eyes, because that is the sensitive light receptive component, and that then triggers downstream targets, or modulates downstream targets, which, for example, could be the pineal gland. And the pineal gland, depending on which organism you're referring to, it varies in its location in the brain, but it is a gland that secretes the hormone melatonin, which you have heard, and I think currently it is also all over in the news, particularly in the US, because of these introduction of these gummies that parents give to their children to calm them down or make them sleep. And I think currently the news is that there is a very high incidence of an intoxication, because the formula is not right, or the kids are being given too many of them, because the parents want their kids to calm it down. So that's the melatonin. It is also known as the hormone of darkness, and that is because it is primarily secreted, or only secreted during the nighttime. Now, this hormone, or the secretion, is regulated also not only by an oscillator that determines when it's being secreted, for how long, but also by light. So when you have it longer date length, which means that you have it in shorter nighttime, you have it in a shorter duration in which melatonin peaks. And if you have it a shorter day, you normally have it a longer night, which is the case in the winter. Then you have a longer period in which melatonin peaks. And these differences in how long melatonin is present during the nighttime is sensed by calendar cells. And these calendar cells, depending then on the length of melatonin, trigger appropriate downstream physiological changes. And one of these changes is, for example, in the next slide. So, do you have any idea what is shown in this image? So above here you can see the annual variation in a jungle crow, and these are testicles. So here you have the testicles of a crow, These are the testicles of a hamster, and in the right corner, the testicle of a cat. And these dependent, so the size of these testicles depends on the season. And that it makes sense because reproduction in nature is more seasonal. And this is regulated by these calendar cells. And the timing, of course, the timing is regulated by these calendar cells, and these calendar cells determine the time based on the time cues. As I mentioned, temperature, peak or minimum in the time of the year, or the melatonin length, how long it peaks during the nighttime. Next.
Michael. Yeah.
So the other extreme is ultradian rhythms, and these are rhythms that have a higher frequency, significantly less than 24 hours. For example, the heart rate, REM sleep, and hormone secretion. I'll show you that in the next slide. So for example, here on the upper where it is with dotted graph, you can see here the hormone secretion, that is the growth hormone. Yes, it is confined during the night time, however, it occurs in pulsatile. It has this pulsatile and type of behavior. So it is an ultradian, but overall collectively also circadian, because it's confined to a particular time of the night. And this is a very important for those who have kids, like Ahmad, because growth occurs during the nighttime, or at least we say that it's very important for kids to get sufficient amount of sleep. It's because growth happens during the nighttime. And why does growth happen during the nighttime? Because the growth hormone secretion is confined into the nighttime. So if you can take away that sleep from your child, you also interfere with growth hormone release, and therefore you interfere with the growth of your child. So it is an empirical, very important that it gives it gets the sleep that is needed for proper health. And that pulsatile action is quite different also between male and female. So that is there is a sex difference there as well. And of course, there's others such as here awakening during the daytime. You're not really awake all throughout in the daytime. You do also have periods where you enter into a siesta, would like to have it in a siesta. So there's a higher sleep that drives awake. Is not constant. It varies across the day, and so forth. And also the dreaming, the cycles in which you dream. So that is the REM component of it in sleep. That also because sleep goes through stages, and these stages therefore although they're confined during the nighttime, they are also occurred at a higher frequency, and therefore are called ultradian rhythms. Next slide, please. So now comes to the very relevant to us in humans, particularly because we are not so much circannual, we are very much in circadian and ultradian. And what we mean with it in circadian, it is it means circa means about, and diem means day. So these are rhythms that have a period of approximately 20 to 40 hours. And they regulated, for example, core body temperature, sleep-wake cycle. So they confined it in sleep to a particular area of the day and wake it into the opposite. Hormone secretions such as melatonin. We said it is a hormone of the darkness, therefore it's confined during the daytime, during the nighttime, but not during the daytime. So circadian rhythms, approximately 24-hour rhythms. And that is defined again in the second slide here. And so it means about a day. Next slide, please. And these are the parameters. I think you also maybe using it in your profession. And when we think about it in rhythms, it is defined by certain characteristics. These are an amplitude, a period, and then there is also what we call a mesor, which is the average around it in which that rhythm and cycle, and the mesor can shift it upwards or downwards as well. So these are the three main parameters that define a rhythm, a circadian rhythm. In case of circadian, the period length is approximately 20 to 40 hours, and the amplitude varies depending on the conditions. Next slide. So circadian rhythms is not something that is only specific for humans. We said this it is hypothesized or theorized that it exists. It's very ancient since life evolved on Earth, if you didn't believe in evolution. And it is true also for plants. And why I bring up this slide here, because a French scientist, de Meren, was the first person who actually, with him, started the experimental chronobiology field. I mean, it has been noted for many, many years before, but experiments really and asking the right questions started with him, and in particular with this mimosa plant that is in front of you. And this type of plant, you can see on the left side here, it has its leaves erect to maximize exposure to the light during the day, and then as the sun then goes down and it disappears slowly, these leaves start to collapse. So one day he was intrigued by this phenomenon. What he did, he said, okay, is this driven by light, or is there something else that drives this phenomenon? So he took this plant and put it into, or placed it into a dark area. And some say it was a cupboard, other he took it into a cellar. Regardless, he screened the light of it, and then found that this rhythm of the leaves being erect or collapse persisted. So that means that it can't be light driven. So there's something that is telling the clock the plant the time of a day, because it always coincided still that it was erect when the sun was up, although it was not exposed to the sun, and it collapsed when the sun went down. So there must be some intrinsic a timing system that these plants had. And so he started to question, so like, could this be temperature fluctuation? Because although he can screen the light from it, but maybe it can still sense certain temperature. Well, it was later then it shown that it's also irrespective of the temperature. If he made that constant, then this certain phenomenon persisted. And that is how now the investigations into finding the driver, the clock, the oscillator that is driving biological phenomena and physiology started. Next, please. So the question becomes, are we rhythmic too? How do we perceive time? What special senses are involved? Do we have a clock? And what sort of a clock do we have? And next slide. So time can be defined as, or one of its definitions is it dictates it in our lives. So this is true. And if you look at what time it is, you find also in Google that it is a construction of the brain. What does that mean? If you click on the next slide, is it probably very confusing to you, but what it means, it's this construction of the brain. So let me tell you how that is. But before that, so I want to tell you a little bit about it in history, about it in time. Time has been very important. If you look at in history for during human evolution and progression and in the different cultures. I mean, the ancient Egyptian used it in water clocks to measure the time. Mechanical clocks were later invented in the 14th century, and pocket watches came later in the 17th century. The first armband watch, which was Timex, followed, and then Rolex, and nowadays we use it in cell phones to tell it in time. So it for some reason, yeah, humans have always been interested in time and measuring it in time, and I'm wondering whether because during this whole time there was something subconscious, because we house it in clock called biological clock that is driving it in this driving this need to tell it in time. But before all of these inventions, of course, there were cells, and cells are impeccable time keepers and time generators. If you can, next slide, please. And so when we talk about it in time and biological timing, we are referring here to a circuitry, right? A clockwork that consists of a circuitry, and that circuitry is composed of a positive and negative translational, transcriptional, translational, and feedback loops. And these transcriptional, translational, and feedback loop they complete each other. They form this certain circuitry that, when it closed, then forms a continuous cycle that completes it within 20 to 14 hours, and that we call it a circadian rhythm. And there's two important concepts when we talk about circadian rhythms, and that is the clock and the oscillator, and they're very often used interchangeably, and it is wrong. What a clock is in biological term, it has to be composed of it has three components. It has an input, it has an oscillator, and has an output. And the input is what conveys information to the oscillator. The oscillator is that circuitry I referred to, and then output is a downstream physiological function. And the input is important for maintaining the oscillated and synchronized to the day-night cycle. So it's always in phase and not out of phase, and that is very important. Otherwise, we at some point started to work during the nighttime, and then we cycle, and then at second, later in the month, we are back into the daytime. So this is very important to maintain it and synchronize, and also the downstream outputs. Next slide. And this is a general overview on the left side, where you can see this schematic, where you have an input, which is here, for example, represented by an eye. You have a master clock, which is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and we have downstream physiological processes that are regulated by this master clock. So the central nervous system is rhythmic, the pituitary is rhythmic, the pineal gland is rhythmically regulated in the sense that it secretes and synthesizes melatonin rhythmically. The liver function and different function that it does during the day and night, the timing of that is regulated by a master clock and so forth. So here you can see the three components: an input, an oscillator in the middle, and an output with sleep wake cycle, locomotor, feeding, temperature, and etc. And this is the clock diagram that you can see here: input, oscillator, output. That is also known as an Eskinogram, that was introduced by Professor Arnold Eskin. That was, as Ahmed said, my supervisor, where I did my master's thesis in. Thank you. Next slide, please. And here are the three main components of this transcription and translation feedback loop. We have a positive elements and negative elements, and when these interact with each other, and when they do it, they form it in a closed circuitry, and that is what generates a rhythm, and that is autonomous. So you can take it out and sell it from your body, and you put it in a dish, and that cell will continue ticking. Next slide, please. So here you can see how the mammalian clock looks like. I don't want to get into too much in detail here, but you can see again the cry and the purrs. These are the negative elements. The clock and the bimal are the positive elements. And you can see the positive elements are so called because they produce the negative elements, the cry and purr. They're being produced and they're shipped outside into the cytoplasm. That usually happens during the daytime. And then they cycle back into the nucleus, and that happens around the transition to the nighttime. And then in the nighttime, they interfere with the positive elements, so they bind it into that. And by doing it, so they basically close that loop. And this phenomenon happens within 24 hours and generates this 24-hour rhythm. Thank you. Next slide. And here is not everything, so it is not that simple as well, because your next question would be is then how does the cycle continue? I mean, once it binds, it needs to be also released, so that the circuit needs to open again and reset itself. And that is mediated through the phosphorylation events of these proteins that then cause the decoupling of the positive element from the negative element. And when that actually happens, then the positive elements can again restart the next cycle. And this is a very precisely and timed a mechanism that occurs, is highly accurate from day in and day out. Next slide. Of course, there is biology and evolution had millions of years to go through, so it had much time to optimize its system, which I guess you guys are working on as well in what you do. But evolution has been there for much longer. So it had a bit more time to perfectionate this system. So there are multiple layers of which that are involved here in this in this clock work circuitry and maintaining it alive. Next slide, please. And there are also multiple level backup systems here as well. So if something goes wrong at a certain level, then you have other levels that can jump in other regulatory mechanisms that can jump in as a backup and still maintain, if not an optimal, but still maintain a ticking clock with about 24 hours. Thank you. Next slide. So this is not something specific that is for mammalian mammals. It exists also in flies. Next slide. And in plants. And the components or the general structure of this clockwork is although the components may be different, but it is in all three cases a transcriptional, translational, and feedback loop. Thank you. Next slide. So what is this master clock? So let's talk about mammals here and humans, for example. What is this master clock? Where is it located? It is actually located in the hypothalamus, and it is the smallest of the nuclei of the hypothalamus. It consists, like Ahmad said, approximately 20,000 neurons, and that is very little. And it is quite heterogeneous in the population. So you have these all have it also in the top right corner where you have these AVP, GABA, GRP, VIP that marks the different types of neurons that make up the master clock, where they have different characteristics. And in the image below, you can see that is actually from a mouse how the master clock looks like looks like. And this is the driver of sleep-wake cycle, and I'll show you that in the next slide, I hope. So this and in A, you can see it here a sleep-wake cycle of a mouse. Everything where it is yellow, white, that is the mouse that is not active, and the darker lines that you see is an activity. Now, when you go in and you lesion this master clock, you put an electrode in there, you apply it in a current, and that lesions the clock, then you will end up with a sleep-wake cycle that is more like an ultradian cycle that is shown in D, where the mouse is active, go back to sleep, is active again, goes back to sleep, and so forth. So it is quite chaotic. So this is proof that your master clock is nicely consolidating your activity into one pattern of the 24-hour day and night cycle, which is in this case for a mouse because it's night and active during the nighttime, and for humans during the daytime. So it is quite a powerful small nuclei within your brain. Next, please. And in humans, in the upper left corner here, you can see here, this is the sleep and wake cycle of a person that went into the mountains for 50 to 60 days, and he was shielded of the temperature and did not exposed to day-night cycles, and he registered every day in the time at which he went into sleep and which time he went and wake up, and you can see in that he remained rhythmic every day. However, he woke up a little bit later than the day before, and that is because our internal clock has a period of approximately more than 24 hours, but the day-night, or the Earth's rotation about its axis, is closer to 24 hours. And that is the importance of the input. We need to reset because our internal period, the period of the master clock, is more than 24 hours. We need to reset it every day to maintain aligned to the Earth's rotation about its axis, so the day-night. And that's what you see in the image below that. You can see some of them are going from left to right, and then you can see the activity of a human that is going quite, it's very accurate, and every day marked by a box. Every day starts at the same time. That is the condition when a person is put or exposed to day and night. So it is maintains it's an activity onset as well as sleep onset aligned to the day and night cycle. Now on the right hand side, you will see, if you look for the first 15 weeks, a quite chaotic sleep-wake cycle. That is the sleep-wake cycle of a newborn up to week 15. And you can see that as newborn, in the initial weeks, it has more or less an ultradian rhythm of a sleep-wake cycle. And really what a baby only does, it wakes up, it wakes up to eat, and then sleep. So it's eat and sleep, and so forth. So but over time, as you move towards week 15, you can see that these bouts become longer and longer. So that is the consolidation of that sleep and the consolidation of that activity until that you have a clear, from 15 to 26 weeks, you have a clear day-night pattern of activity and sleep. So it is not the baby that wants to drive you crazy on purpose. It doesn't do that. It's the biology that does it. So the next time you can have kids, or Ahmed will have another one, but he knows it already and how it goes. It's just the normal part of life and the development that happens in that stage. Next, please. Okay, and we'll talk a bit about the resetting now, the importance of life. Next, please. So this is a diagram, but very simple. We said the clock needs to be reset, and the way it does that is by light primarily. It is the strongest time cue. It is picked up by the retina, and that and the retina and then it sends it an axon to the clock among it and other brain structure as well, and early in the morning when the sun rises, that's when the resetting actually happens. Next slide. So that's the input, right? And this is a small little experiment. I just want to show you how this resetting, or what happens to your brain when this resetting actually happens. And this is an experiment. We did it when we had it in mice. They are in the dark, and then we just turn on the light. And what you can see here on the left-hand side is an image. Down at the bottom where that marked in white area is, that is your master clock outlined. And now we are going to turn on the light. Next slide, please. And this area will lighten up. So this is now lighted and triggered neuronal activity. So the next time you go into bed, you wake up during the nighttime to go to the bathroom, and you turn on the light, you are actually activating your master clock. And as a result of that, you're probably shifting your internal clock, because your clock is what is regulating your sleep-wake cycle, among it and other physiological processes. So that's how that looks like and comes about. I hope this is a bit of proof how powerful that light can be, and that it can activate your brain. Next, please. And if you think about light and pollution, it is huge, and it's a big problem, right? Next slide. And this is next slide. Actually, it will show you over the years and how the US became more and more, light and the pollution increased, and what is expected in 2025. So what I show you then in an experiment with turning on the light and activating it in your master clock, light pollution during the nighttime. If you live in a city, you are exposed to this light, and it is very unhealthy, because it constantly, if your eyes are open, but if closed, and also to some extent, it will interfere with your master clock. Right, and that has over the long-term downstream physiological and health issues. Next slide, please. And here you can see here is a distribution depending on where you live on in whether in a city or you go towards the suburb. If you've noticed that in a city you can barely see any stars, and if you're in the suburb, you'd actually do see the stars, and that is because of the light and pollution that exists in the city. And you often hear that when you go camping, and you do that usually outside in the city, that you come back and you're quiet and refreshed. And that is because you are now not exposed to that light at night anymore, except in the natural light from the stars and the moon. And that has something to do with you not being jet lagged and light and not interfering with your master clock and downstream physiological processes. Next slide, please. And here we did an experiment, many others have done it as well, and I show you what actually happens when you give a light pulse to the sleep-wake cycle, in this case of a mouse. So you have anything in black is an activity, and no black means that a mouse is resting. So in the second, so above is a mouse in the light darkened cycle. Activity is confined to the darkened period, and then you just put the mouse in constant darkness, and because it has a period, the oscillator oscillates quicker than the Earth's rotation about its axis, or the 12-12 light dark cycle. It then goes it free runs, what we call towards the left side. If you give a lighted pulse, which is marked here by this yellow line, you can see a resetting happen. You are actually shifting the clock to the right, which is marked by this. If you notice this red line now is shifted to the right. And if you give the light pulse at the end of the night time, which is at the last the last actogram here, you can see that the activity onset, which is the red line, now shifts in the advanced direction. So depending on where you give the light, you shift it and you sleep it and wake it and cycle, either delay or advance. So light is very powerful and jet lags you. Thank you. Next slide. Now, light is not the only time cue. Melatonin does a similar thing and makes sense. So melatonin is also known as a chronobiotic. So it is also considered a time cue. It is not an external time cue. It is an internal endogenous time cue because it's produced by your body. It is under the regulation of the master clock. But once it's secreted during the nighttime, it activates cells that express melatonin receptors, therefore conveys temporal information to these cells and tells these cells that, yeah, it's actually nighttime. I need to do these functions, right? And then when it's not there during the daytime, it usually does not produce certain functions and does it in other functions. So melatonin, similarly, depending on where you apply it, it can advance you or delay you. Right? So if you take melatonin and you take it at the wrong time of day, it could cause more harm than good. Right? So you need to take it at the correct time for it to have its to do its function properly, and for you to obtain the benefits out. The benefits. Thank you. Next slide. So if you don't believe that there is a clock, and I have not convinced you, then all you have to do is go back and remember how you were jet lagged the last time. And jet lag is the proof that there must be a clock there, because the reason we go through jet lag in first place is because in this case technology has gone much quicker than evolution. Right? Our bodies were never meant to be able to adapt to time and changes that we are exposed to now when we travel. And the consequences are jet lag. I'll show you next one. So when you are jet lagged, you feel irritated. Some have headaches. In my case, I get constipated and so forth. So if you think about these phenomenons that are coupled to jet lag, that means somehow your physiology is being upset. And if you want to get it more exact, what this means is that your clock regulates all these physiological processes, because when you're jet lagged and that affects your clock, it wouldn't affect all the physiological processes that are coupled to that clock, right? So constipation is a resultant of your GI tract not working properly anymore. That means that because you have now messed up your clock or interfered with your clock, that means that downstream physiological GI functions, which is gastrointestinal functions, are also affected. If you have problem concentrating and memorizing or performing mentally as you arrive in your destination, if you travel from here from Australia to England, for example, or to LA, you don't perform it as well. That means that also here the clock that you have interfered with because of this time and shifting is now affecting your mental performance, which is your clock is regulating learning and memory. Indeed, it does it. So this is a way how you actually feel that you have an internal clock, is via this jet lag. Next slide, please. So there are rhythms and cycles everywhere, and here is a small, just a fraction of what cycles, like high blood pressure, and what times blood pressure increases when it is low, the time when melatonin is down, it peaks, bowel movement is suppressed in the nighttime, for example, deeper sleep at 2 a.m., body temperature starts is lowest at 4:30 in the morning, alertness peaks at 10 a.m., Best motor coordination is at 2:30 p.m. Fastest reaction time at 3:30 p.m. Cardiovascular and muscle strength are greatest in the late afternoon, and so forth. So everything physiology about us is rhythmic. Next slide, please. And if you look at the circuitry, right, your master clock is located in the anterior hypothalamus. And the anterior hypothalamus is connected to the paraventricular nucleus. And the paraventricular nucleus is like it in a gateway. There's so many different brain circuitries, but also brain and peripheral neuronal connections that run it through this structure. So the SEN or master clock in the anterior hypothalamus sends it timing intervention to the paraventricular, and through it you have all these highways of connections, and that is how the information about it in time is disseminated throughout these different neuronal circuitries, and become so all these processes that are downstream results of these circuitries. They are being time stamped and time regulated. Next slide. And if you can press again, I hope this video plays. Oh, no, it doesn't. Okay. So what I actually wanted to show you, there was a video on the previous slide that shows your SEN in action in real time, but it's not working. So your SEN, chronobiologists mainly describe it as a conductor, right? And so you have an orchestra that consists of highly talented musicians, and everyone that plays is able to play a melody. But a melody altogether will create a symphony, but that can only happen when you have a conductor that orchestrates these musicians. So that is basically the function of your master clock, and how it creates synchrony and comes out with a symphony, which is body normal and healthy bodily functions. Next slide, please. Now, it is much more than complex. You don't have only one orchestra. Every organ has a clock in itself. So you have, your body consists of multiple orchestras. And all of them have a conductor, which have an oscillator themselves, but also there is a master clock, and the master clock still is the conductor of all these orchestras that is going on. So there are multiple levels of regulations to maintain a healthy status of your body and regulated normal bodily functions. So it's quite complex. Next slide, please. So what happens when you take away light, right? So if you dim the light in the orchestra, your musicians, the musicians can no longer see you as good, right? Or if you, next slide, turn off all the light all together, then the information from the conductor can no longer be perceived by the musicians. Next slide. And as a result, you end up with chaos, which we call it chrono disruption. Right? So everyone is still playing its melody, but they're not synchronized anymore. And that is because they can't see the information that comes from the conductor. And that could be because the input is broken, right? Or it could be the output is broken, or it could be the conductor is sick, right? So there could be different levels of these disruption that happening. Next slide. And if we put some biology in this, and we put here the SCN, which is your master clock, you can see here the master clock, the SCN, is driving it in here the food and trainable clock, where food and trainable clock is driving your liver clock, your kidney clock, heart, and pancreas. However, light is not the only time cue which directly affects your master clock. Also, food is very important because you have a food and trainable oscillators. And food is very strong at very strong time cue, in fact, and time cue, and it affects certain type of peripheral clocks. For example, liver, kidney, heart, and pancreas. So if you give it food and eat during the night time where you're supposed to be sleeping, and you're up and you're eating, then you are targeting certain peripheral clocks during that time and overriding the signal that comes from your master clock. And as a result, you're activating these certain clock and you're shifting them, which then causes a desynchrony between your master clock and peripheral clock, which causes on the long-term health and consequence, such as obesity, diabetes, and so forth. So this is a desynchronization that happens when you mess up with these conductors, that they are not in harmony, they are not synced with each other. Next slide, please. And yeah, I think I came to the end. And then this, so the end message here is that your master clock is absolutely important in maintaining all the different rhythms in a certain phase relationship to each other, but also in relation to the Earth's rotation about its axis, or the day and the nighttime. And when these sequence of events, when one of them or several of them play up, and you introduce them, because we can turn on the light during the nighttime, we can go to the fridge and start eating at nighttime or do other things, then we are disturbing the overall synchronization, the overall network of clocks and oscillators in the body, which could have a long-term bad health consequences. And I believe that is the end. Yep, and thank you for your attention. I hope you've learned a little bit about the biological clock, and maybe even can take some of that into your everyday understanding of your body and why you feel this way, and maybe even integrate some of it into what you guys are doing in your profession.
Thank you very much. It was amazing to learn about all these things, and like for me, what's fascinating is like all these different terminologies that like we use, let's say, different nomenclature for things that you're mentioning there. Like for example, like like the how much the clock basically keeps up. We call it like holdover, or like that the light cues, like we call them sync basically.
Yep.
And it's very interesting. So let's open the floor for questions. Any questions? Please unmute.
Well, I got one, Ahmad. I missed what was who's the orchestrator of the body? I missed that. Of all the
The orchestrator is your master clock. That is, but it really depends on which clock you're referring to. So there's a hierarchy of clocks. The master clock, or that's how we like to see it, is your suprachiasmatic nucleus, that is in the hypothalamus, and then there are other clocks distributed throughout the body in the liver and so on. So yeah, so it depends on which clock you're referring to. It could be in the SCN, it could be in the liver, and so forth.
Thank you.
Yep.
Very interesting.
Next, I think Bijan, you have a question.
No, I don't know if it's a question. I was just wondering if this master clock is electrical or chemical.
Oh yes, very good question. It's both. Oh well, you mean okay. So the master clock, the master clock consists of an aggregate of cells, and every cell, So these 20,000 neurons, for example, if we talk about the suprachiasmatic nucleus, 20,000, approximately 20,000 cells, they all house the same type of oscillator, and it is a molecular oscillator which consists of these positive and negative elements, so proteins, and these interact with each other. And this type of positive negative interaction occurs within a time frame of 24 hours, and therefore it generates these 24-hour oscillations. So it's called a molecular clock. Now, these because they are neurons, in case of the master circadian clock, they then also show a rhythmic firing pattern. Right, so the SEN fires predominant during the daytime and is silent during it in the nighttime. Right? Whether there is lighted or there is or lighted is absent. So there is therefore also an electrical component to it. So that is how temporal information, this molecular oscillation that happens within the cell, is conveyed then into an electrical pulse. And that electrical pulse is rhythmic, so day active, night quiet, and that is conveyed then to another cell that is present at a different part of the brain, right? So it activates that in a rhythmic fashion, and that's how temporal information is conveyed from one cell to another. However, there are also chemical factors that are being secreted by these certain cells as well, and they make themselves, or they travel via the blood stream to other brain areas or the periphery, or even are secreted locally to affect cells in the surrounding. For example, VIP and ABP, these are products that are being produced also rhythmically under the regulation of this, the molecular oscillator within these certain cells, and that then secreted in these certain substance in a rhythmic fashion. And those certain cells that have receptors for these certain chemicals, that because they're secreted in a rhythmic fashion, these receptors are being activated rhythmically, and therefore cause cellular changes in a rhythmic fashion. That's how that happens, for example, as well. And similar in the periphery, like in the adrenal gland, it produces cortisol, for example, right? And that in a rhythmic fashion as well. So it's not only something that is specific for the SEN. We said we have oscillators and clocks in the peripheral organs, pancreas, liver, adrenal gland, kidney, and so forth. And they also secrete their specific substances in a rhythmic, daytime dependent fashion. And as they secrete, it goes into the bloodstream, wherever there is a receptor somewhere or a responder, right? Because that substance is being secreted in a daytime dependent manner, it will then also convey that information in a daytime dependent manner to receptive structures or receptive cells in different parts of the body. And that's how a network is formed. Right, so the SEN sends a signal to let's say B, and then B has its own, B becomes activated, so it has its own connection to C, whether it is neuronal or it's hormonal, right? So that continues like this, in a network fashion.
Thank you.
Interesting.
I have an interesting question. There are times when I could wake up in the middle of the night and I just know what time it is, and then I'll look at a clock and I'm very accurate. I don't think I'm alone with this. What's going on there? There's something synchronous in my head.
That's right. That's your clock. When I said at the very beginning, I said, so one of the primary functions of your internal biological clock is to predict events from happening before that. So you can predict when they're happening. So usually on a Monday, you feel the worst, right? And you're way off the timing. You just came from the weekend, and what you did there is you social jet lagged yourself. You partied, or you had long nights because now it's movie time and so forth. So now your body is out of sync from your social timing, which is from Monday to Friday. But during the week, you then rely more during the beginning of the week on these clocks to resynchronize to that social rhythm, and you'll see that it gets better every day, and the most accurate start and around Wednesdays or Thursdays, and you feel also much better during this time, and probably not because the weekend is coming. It's because you became more and more aligned with your social rhythm, right? Yeah, so that is it's so for example, if you look at animals, there are night predators and night predators that come out and active a certain time of the day, and you don't want and for a mouse and an owl, it would be an advantage if the mouse would be able to predict it and when that predator is there, so it knows the predator is there and it's highly active at a certain time of the day, so it can do what it needs to do to stay alive during this certain time. So it's a survival thing as well. But yeah, that's the primary function of your clock, is to predict events from occurring.
Thank you. That was quite fascinating. And I think just listening to your presentation and looking at Ahmad's face through it all, I think it's really funny how a lot of the things we do in the synchronization and timing of equipment mirrors a lot of things going on in the body. Things we call the master clock, we'll call it maybe a grandmaster, or there's all these other clocks that are running around doing things. It's amazing to see some of the mirroring that goes on there. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. This is what I had initially the discussion with Ahmed. Well, I talked to Ahmed at the beginning. I think we fascinated each. It was, I don't know. I think I was on yeah, it was. I have never been on drugs, but I think it would feel like that because we were stimulating each other, having this discussion. And I think this goes back to the original thing that I've presented. We humans have always been fascinated with time, and subconsciously, because we have such a timing mechanism, I think that is the trigger. The trigger for this interest in time, interest in synchrony, and why it is really important for us is because we have integrated in our cells a timing mechanism. Yeah.
Yes. Any more questions? So I was wondering, like those neurons, that's aggregation of neurons in the hypothalamus. Is there a certain frequency that they oscillate in? Is it known, or?
Oh, you asked me that question before and I didn't look it up.
Okay. I'm also wondering that let's say about 20,000. Is that only for human, or it's like across all species? And then is there studies that if you reduce them, you still have the same stability or not? Because that to me is like a clock quorum, like the reason why there are a lot of them, because there is some changes in each one of them, and then you said that they interact with each other, so they self-correct basically, right? So
yes, so they all fire in more or less synchrony. They're all in phase. And they do that by they are connected physically, but they're also connected chemically, so that they can secrete substances that then is like a local time cue saying, okay, you need to be in this certain particular phase now. And when you disturb this, so let's say you take all these 20,000 cells and you put them in a dish and you have them separated from each other, so there's no physical connection. And let's say you also perfuse, you change your medium, it's a perfusing system, so that the chemical signal that is secreted is always removed. In this certain situation, you will see that these certain cells slowly start to become out of sync. That means if you measure the signal from every cell individually, They're all the same in the sense that they cycle.
Yes.
And their period is also very similar, but they're not in the same stage of the cycle. So they start to drift. That
Yes.
is called internal desynchrony.
Uh-huh.
And that usually when if you were to measure an output, an electrical output from the whole dish, that would give you like a dead person ECG flat line, because that line would be the sum of all the oscillations which are in different phases, so they cancel out in each other.
It's
Yeah,
destructive. Yes.
correct. Yes, correct.
This is similar to like those experiments when they put like metronomes, and then you have the table allowing the transfer of energy, and then you get all the metronomes in sync. But if you basically put it on a hard surface, you don't get that. I mean, you still get it because everything is like, you know. But I mean, if they have them isolated, you don't have like that synchrony, and it's very interesting. I think definitely there is room for using the math that we have in, let's say, in this side of the industry, like using ADEV or like MDEV, TDEV, and watching, let's say, with changes of like number of neurons, what happens. So another thing I want to clarify is, like you said, like this oscillation feeds into another part of the brain or another part of the hypothalamus, which that one determines the cycle. So that is basically the clock, right? That one's the one that integrates these oscillations. Is that right?
Oh, okay. So the clock. So here is the clock consists three components: clock and oscillator. Clock is input, oscillator output. Collectively is clock.
Yeah.
What you're referring to is that image where I showed master clock, paraventricular nucleus, and then the
Yes.
the circuitries.
Yes.
Yeah. So the message here was just I wanted to show is that the SEN, as it does, because in that video that didn't work, it's really a pulsatile activity, and so when the SEN is firing during the daytime, the next downstream target would either be activated or inhibited. It depends on, because the SEN is primarily GABAergic, which means it would inhibit. When it's activated, it would inhibit whatever it is connected to. So it's switched. It depends on how the receptor works and the neurotransmitter. But therefore, it would downstream during the daytime when the SEN is active, it would inhibit the activity. And during the nighttime when the SEN is silent, you remove the inhibition, and therefore you would allow those downstream target to be excited now. And this excitement activation oscillates depending on the time of day. So it's high during certain time and low at night. That then conveys is like a time cue, a timestamp for other circuitries that flow through or are connected to this, right? And this is how the information is passed on, right? So if A is your clock, is your master clock, and B is a target that is affected by or is connected by the master clock, and then you have C is connected to B, right? Then C will be influenced, because B, by how B is in that moment, right? And if you have D connected to C, then that is then passed on to D as well. So
we
it's
call that boundary clocks.
okay, boundary clock. Okay, yep. So
It's
that's
quite interesting.
yeah. So yeah, and
No.
you know, and depending on the transmitter you have, it's either so A inhibits B depending on the transmitter, right? But B could be then excitatory in the sense that its neurotransmitter primarily is an excitation. So C, which is connected to B, while beaten is being activated, could then activate C. So B could activate C. but when A is active, because the neurotransmitter is different, it will inhibit B, right? So it depends. It interacts and regulates the different circuitries that are connected into B, depending on the type of neurotransmitters being utilized at the moment. But in generally, regardless of type of neurotransmitters, there is a day-night difference in the firing pattern, or more or less, and this difference is information. It gives away information about time, and that's how, and anything that travels through this certain area or hub, it becomes time stamped,
Yes.
right? And so forth. But of course, you can also lesion the SCN, which I showed in one of the in the master clock, which I showed in one of the diagram in the mouse, and you get this ultradian sleep-wake cycle, so very high rhythmic sleep, active, sleep, active, sleep, active, totally chaotic. Now, however, when you come in and you give them another time cue, for example, food, which now becomes the next dominant, you could reinitiate a sleep it and wake it and cycle. So now you substituted for the master clock with another clock. And I think we had this discussion, and then you said, oh, that is something, if I have something, I don't know in what country, something else that pops up and takes it over and then does the job there to continue, so that not the whole system is breaking down or something. So you can, yes, so you
That's for
have that.
consensus. Yes.
Yes.
I
Okay,
had this
good.
weird
There we go. Uh-huh.
I had this weird thought when you were describing. The weird thought was that I was wondering, what if something is irreversible, then entropy will increase as time goes forward, right? So why I was thinking about that is because why is it important for the cell to know the time? Other than function things, but I mean, in general, what is age, right? I was thinking about aging.
Yeah.
And then I had the funny thought when you were describing that about the chemical reaction, that maybe the thing that's irreversible is the stomach digesting food. And so that makes or gives us our concept of time, because it's irreversible, right? Otherwise, if it was reversible, it would be no concept of 5 minutes ago and 5 minutes from now to ourselves.
Yeah, okay, that's a higher level of thoughts now. That is very interesting. Yes.
That's very
Bijan,
interesting
thank you very
because
much for your question. But
that's where you have like energy basically getting consumed or something. It's very interesting.
okay, yeah. So for when it comes with food, it's quite interesting because, if you so your liver originally your liver does certain things, for example, during the daytime and nighttime, right? So and your GI tract, your gastrointestinal system is all the systems and the processes required for digestion food are active and present during the daytime, because that's where you eat. But during the nighttime, these processes are down regulated to more like stopped it as well, perhaps. So when you come now, and maybe some other different process started to happen during it in the nighttime that are involved in cleaning, or I'm not sure. I'm not a specialist in metabolism, but what I want to say is that when you start to eat during the nighttime, because the processes and the chemicals that are there during that time are different, that the food is also how the GI tract and the liver and so on is dealing with the food is different, handled differently than how it is handled during it in the daytime, when there are different enzymes present and different processes active. And that is perhaps a theory of it, why these certain problems are happening from at nighttime eating, and why, for example, you can gain it more weight when you do nighttime eating, because you don't. First of all, you don't burn it as much. That's one thing, but also how you start to store, process this food. It could also be different. yeah, but that's all I can say. I'm yeah, that's where I stop.
And then, so the synchronization, so like there's a synchronization from the master clock to all these different limbs. Do
Yeah.
these limbs have also some sort of highly specialized, let's say, neurons that they also maintain time, or they simply just work based on the process and they just sync as the like this hormonal changes are coming through the body?
Yeah. So no matter where in the body you look, the oscillator, the molecular oscillator, which is the transcriptional translational feedback loop, and the components are identical.
Mhm.
So they are identical. No matter whether you talk about a neuron, SCN, master clock oscillator is identical to the oscillator that is found in the liver.
Mhm.
But the downstream processes they are coupled, they are different.
Mhm.
And the signals they listen to are also different, right? So for example, SCN sends via multiple neuronal connection to information to the pituitary gland. And the PT then secretes hormones that are released into the bloodstream. And the hormones then target downstream organs, such as the adrenal gland, such as the liver. And these have clocks in them as well, or they have oscillators. And these hormones now function as time cues, time cues, which are coming from the master clock, not directly, but via multiple neuronal connections, conveyed and then via the bloodstream, is used as a highway to distribute these time cues. Those organs or cells that have receptors for these time cues will be affected, and they now, similar to light affecting the master clock, now these hormones will function as an input in resetting these local peripheral clocks. And that's how the harmony and the synchrony throughout the body is maintained. Yeah.
Mhm. So another thing, like you were showing that graph with an experiment with that person who was in the cave, and then
Yes.
you had like this drift. So
Yes.
is that done also on different age groups? Because why I'm asking is like because in my previous life doing research in biomedical, I was
Yeah.
studying spatial cognition. I did that over different age groups, and you can see that they decline because that one was basically the hippocampus,
Yeah.
the performance of the hippocampus. So, is there also something done like this over age, and you see like I don't know, as people age, gets better or gets worse, or good news,
Yeah.
bad news?
Yes. So I'm not familiar much with the human research side in the age whether it was done, but I can tell you that it does, from animal work, it does change as you go from newborn,
Oh, I see.
adult, and later in life. Definitely it changes, and what changes is and you can measure that in the EEG in the
Yes.
brain.
Oh,
Yes, you can see that
is it the
that
changes
there
of
is.
alpha, beta, gamma, delta energy
Yes,
level?
yes, yes. The oscillations, how, the different frequencies, the ratios between them may change, how harmonious they are, as well, like a population of certain cells, are they now fly more chaotic, or they're more in synchrony and firing? That changes duration as well. We also cycle as humans. We have what we call chronotypes. So some of us are very early people, and others are very late people, right? So naturally, this is genetics. It's just like a fingerprint, and so naturally, we, during the teenage years, because we have all these hormones and stuff going on and so forth. But I'm not sure whether this is directly related, but generally in teenagers, where there happens a switch towards very late, right? And then as we can get out of these, later adulthood and age, we turn in the opposite direction again. We become very early in persons, right? Or we
Wow.
wake up earlier, right? The amount of sleep required and also is a lot during the initial years in development. And I think this has something to do with it and related to absorption of it and information and learning, right? And to which we needed to survive it and etc. But and then later on, the sleep reduces it gradually, and we wake up at much earlier as well. So yep, there are age-dependent changes in that as well. And I also think that this circadian network system with age becomes less and less synchronized, less and less organized, right? And in the sense that now you have these external factors that become more and more have an influence on disturbing that network, because the network becomes weaker as it we age. At least that's the thought,
Wow.
and that may cause a problem. That's why it's I think for an aged person to be subjected to jet lag, there might be different the consequences of that and how long that person is in a state of jet lag than when a younger person is there. And I think the tendency is more like, because of a weak the weakened network comes with it some advantages as well, because when you weaken a network, it means your network has become more flexible, it's more tweakable,
Yes.
right? So in our 21st century, it turns out if we need to be more flexible and we need to adjust when we travel all over the place, we having a more weakened network means we can adjust it much quicker and therefore not go through all this mental cloudiness and so on because of the jet lag. But when we are younger, our networks is much more consolidated, much more stronger, and therefore it is not so flexible and it's harder, right? So that's also an age related.
And also, I think traveling east or west also has something to do with that 25 hours, right?
Yes, that depends on the period. Yes.
Because the clock is always longer than this rotation of Earth. You have like it's easier to go this way because you have just longer days, but shorter days is harder when you fly to east. Is that the case?
That is correct. That's correct. So slowing the clock or accelerating the clock, depends on which direction you go. It's different. That's why going eastward or westward, it takes different amount of time to then adapt it into adapt to the Newton time zone. It depends on which direction you're flying.
That's so
that is correct. Yep.
I'm wondering if, let's say, certain Meniere disease in an early onset will have, let's say, different behavior on the natural tendency of the clock, how much it goes off, or how much like let's say, I don't know, that 25 hours, is it like, or let's say certain Meniere disease, or like certain, let's say, influence of drugs, like they put you like a shorter time or something. Like, I don't know about any of that.
That is correct. So there is an emerging field called chronomedicine.
I see.
It is a part of personalized medicine, which is coming. And I think your wife knows about this. And I think we'll be dealing with this because it is the new medicine, the direction things are going. So it has been shown, for example, for cancer drugs, that if you apply it at certain time of the day, so it is more effective at lower concentrations and therefore have less side effects. So you can, by just applying at certain times of the day, you can have a better outcome at a much reduced concentration. And therefore the reduction in the concentration would also mean, or the dosage would mean, less certain side effects from it in the drug. And so yeah, this is actually is currently a very interesting field, and it's on the rise and coming. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yes, so she showed up actually here. Jesslyn, like she had an exam, otherwise she wanted to come earlier.
No problem. Good luck with the exam.
She
She'll do
already
brilliant.
finished the exam. She just showed up here.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
So Jesslyn, you don't want to say anything? Microphone. Your microphone should be on. Okay, we'll spare it. Okay, any more questions? No more questions? I mean, I look forward to do some research, let's say, with you, Oliver, on things. Okay,
Hello,
great.
Tijan.
Oh, here's Jesslyn.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for wishing me good luck. Sorry, I couldn't figure out the microphone or anything, but yeah, nice to meet you.
So
Same,
I was
Jess, yeah.
overhearing her lecture, and it ended up with all of this.
That's right. Yeah, that was cool.
How is med school? I met in the US.
It's good. Yeah, it's good.
Yes.
I just had my UQ exam actually, so
Oh,
yeah.
US.
oh, okay. In the US. Oh, that's great. Fantastic. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good.
Awesome. Okay, great. So, I mean, we're down to 7 people. So next call will be back to normal time, unless we have again more Oliver or some Australian or someone from Japan. So we want to keep this open also, like the possibility to have Asian like friendly time. But then to the Europeans, you see, I think all passed through 12 midnight. So we have, unfortunately, Earth is round, and we don't have.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, we are not made for this, so
We are not
so
made
yeah,
for
no,
this.
no, we need to stay in sync. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you.
All right.
Good to
Thank
meet
you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Thank
Beitan.
you.
Thank you for your questions. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Jess. Ahmad, thank you very much for this certain opportunity and for the lovely introduction.
You're welcome.
Love
You're
to
welcome.
continue in
Thank
this discussion in the future, and maybe we can hook up somehow your networks to
Yes, yes.
the
All
brain clock.
we have so many
And
different methods and algorithms for testing. I can't wait for it.
So I got these
yeah.
bone conduction headphones, so maybe we can
Oh
connect
yeah,
a
yeah.
Yes,
a
we put
Max clock
an
and
atomic
bone
clock there.
conduction.
That's it. That's it.
Wonderful.
Yes, because like I said, millions of years of evolution, our internal clock is far ahead of you guys. Sorry to say.
Yes, yes, definitely.
So
Definitely.
maybe I save you some headache by
Yes.
connecting it with the human clock.
In general,
Yeah.
this bio-inspiring things are fascinating. Like how basically I mean, this is also a process of evolution that we come up with this, these unicellular creatures end up in multicellular and everything, and then they come up with all these atomic clocks and concept of time and everything
Without
externally.
us.
It's just
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. So whenever I see Ahmad, one of the images that pop into my brain is I see a hard drive, a computer, the PCs, and then I see there a unit. I don't know why, but it's yellow, it's bubbling, and in there are cells, and these are your clock, the oscillator that is driving it. So that's the connection.
Yes.
that's your
That's
time
pretty much,
giver.
it's
You
very
have,
interesting. That what you said about time, that there's input, the
yeah,
oscillator, the output. It's pretty much how the time card is. The input is
yes,
basically the GPS and everything, and then
yeah,
the atomic clock is right in the middle, and then
yeah.
you go out basically from the PCIe bus, and then or PPS, and then the rest you feed the whole system with. It's
So
just everywhere the same thing. It's just fascinating.
Arnold, yeah.
We have the same paradigm, really, because GPS and the sun, right? The same kind of
Oh
wireless
yes,
paradigm.
yes, that is correct. So
It's so
Arnold
interesting.
Eskin,
Exactly. GPS is your son. Like.
that's right. So Arnold Eskin, who I showed in the image, who came up with this clock, which called the Eskinogram. He actually is a physicist. So he did study physics. So I think So he's a biologist, chronobiologist, of course, but he also had a physics background, and probably that's where this bridging the
Similarities.
fields and
Yeah.
from physics into biology, and that's why it probably resonates with Newton as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
amazing.
wish we had also some experts. I mean, this is not related to TAP, but let's say for memory and like what is going on, let's say with all this like associated memory, and then they're showing up right now in, let's say, in AI and like all in deep learning, and now they are very similar also to, as far as I remember from my biology courses. Like Charlie, I think you have the best son, in terms of service, like you are
Actually, we're kind of clouded over here by Canadian wildfires right now.
yeah.
It's
Oh
giving
dear.
us an orange sky out here. Hey, thank you. This was really, really fascinating. But I do have to say, when you look at the intensity and complexity of all of these clocks and how they work together, and I'm sorry, but I see intelligent design here. I don't see evolution in any way. This is
Okay.
impossible to evolve, man. That's like saying all this stuff Ahmad does. Well, look what I dug up in the ground, a time card.
Yes.
It just evolved out of a rock,
The thing is,
man.
like,
The time card came from a rock. No,
the
no,
thing
I'm
is, like,
sorry.
you can have both of these coexist. Like you can have a creator that just run a batch file that is called evolution, and then let it go instead of
I'll
like.
keep digging in my yard, see if I find a time card, Ahmad. But I don't think so.
So
Yes,
just
I'll
that's
keep
right.
busting or
on a
brand it
separate
apart.
note, Charlie,
So
like
Charlie, from a
stress
physics
you.
standpoint,
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
from a physics standpoint, they have something called the infinite monkey theorem, right? And so this infinite monkey theorem basically says that, given enough time, some monkeys can type out Shakespeare, right? And you can mathematically
Well,
prove that this is possible.
No, but something very interesting in my research is, like, let's say when I observe, I love holdover. It's a beauty for me because it's all like it's a random walk, and then you're every oscillation is basically a chaotic move that we are basically simplifying it into an oscillation. There is no such thing as oscillation. It's very interesting. And now when you observe the random walk of multiple clocks, you may have, let's say, two crossing over, but let's say having a third one crossing over at the same time with the two is very rare, if impossible. Now having four is like even crazier. So now putting this together, that like just based on Brownian motion, you have some molecules ending up in a form that like basically results in, let's say, I don't know, some basics that they will go to proteins and so on and so forth. It's very crazy, to imagine. Again, I want to be always like, I look at things like a scientist, but from statistics point of view, it is so crazy. You need to have an influence from an external system to put them in that form. Yeah, there's things like, again, that's not my specialty. Let's say you have gravity, you have, like, I don't know, there's hydrophobic, hydrophilic things and so on. But like there is some architect to me. Again, I don't want to enter those philosophical.
It's something to think about your worldview, because if you think about timing and synchronization and all that stuff, of which half of which I have to confess I did not understand what you were saying, Oliver. I don't have a medical background like that. But if you look at it from an evolutionary point of view, you're going to come away with looking to the next piece of it. You're trying to push it as a scientist. You're trying to push it like, what's going on here? But if you also look at it like, there's got to be an intelligent creator behind all this. This is like, this statistically is impossible to just evolve.
Yes.
And you're going to also look at it like, where is this going? Why is it like that? You're going to look at it a little bit differently. And I know I try to admonish young scientists to decide your worldview, because it's going to really affect how you push your science.
Yeah.
And you're going to look at it one way, you're going to see things one way. You're going to look at it the other, you're going to see it kind of differently. So to me, this one's kind of plain, oh my gosh, this is intelligent design. There's no way statistically that could just like
no, they
happen.
designed it in open compute human, right?
Ah, that's right. Thank you. No, I got to drop off, but hey, this is available. We're gonna
Yes, it is
the
recorded.
recording, right?
It's gonna be up with the slides.
Oh
I think
no.
I gotta watch
I
it
didn't.
again and try it. This is like kind of thing I gotta watch twice. It's like, what? What?
Or if,
What is she?
well, Charlie, if you come up with some crazy idea you want to test it and we can help out, please let me know. Yeah.
It's yeah. I mean, electrochemical, I think, is a very key to a lot of science when you mix the two
Yeah.
together. It really is.
Yeah.
And,
So I guess
um,
also one of the messages here is maybe this for Jess is important as well, is usually doctors treat, they give a medication to treat certain, either the symptoms or whatever, substituting something that is absent here. But if we just think about that, we should not only think about that one thing. It probably that we need to look at the big picture here as well, and that one chemical, if it is not timed right and it is not applied, in the same frequency, for example, growth hormone, right, which is pulsatile, and if you give it continuously, it will have it. We need to basically, the treatments that you should be applying or giving should probably most effective and efficient if they were applied in a manner that reflects the natural, how it's naturally exists there. So we need to reinstate this complexity of harmonization, synchronization, and not apply it outside of when it is normally should be there. Like growth hormone, don't give it during the daytime, for example, because it is convenient for us because we are active. Who wants to stay up at night and then give it at night? That's just an extreme case. We should be
yeah.
applying it during the nighttime,
You know,
substituting it
I'm not a
in a
medical
pulse.
doctor, but that makes absolute sense.
Yep.
I hope
Yep.
that kind of science really spreads well because
Yeah.
it just sounds like a missing piece that will open up a lot of understanding.
Yep.
Okay.
Cool.
Goodbye.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
bye bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Charlie,
Bye-bye,
Bijan, Jess.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.